So first things first is that the interview that will be sent out to people will be the short version. It will be about 5 minutes, which goes by really quickly, as I'm sure you can imagine. And then what will happen is once we finish this interview, I'll send it to our editors and they'll edit and then send it back to you to be approved. And so we're trying to send the video out by the first Monday of February, which is the 5th. Okay. So they will probably edit it and finish it tomorrow, and then you'll have a few days to look at it and say whether you like it or you hate it. And so if it's the case that you don't like it, then we'll just redo it and then send it out when we can.
Okay. I don't think that would be necessary.
Yeah, I don't think so either, but I just have to say it in case. Okay.
Has it happened yet?
No, it hasn't happened.
No.
There's been one question where someone answered and then was like, wait, I need to double check my answer. So then they had to go back and check their answer. But that's been it as far as that. Okay, so let's see. So we're recording and it looks like.
Do I need to do anything?
Nope.
In terms of, okay.
I just need to make sure that I have my stuff on. Otherwise, you know, it only benefits me, which is fine, but I think other people probably want to hear it too. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started. Hi, my name is Jessica Gladstone, and I'm a doctoral student in the Department of Human Development and Quantitative Methodology at the University of Maryland, and I'm here today with Dr. Johnmarshall Reeve, who's a professor in the Department of Education at Korea University. So thank you for joining me today.
Yeah, my pleasure.
Yeah, so let's go ahead and get into it. The first question I have for you is, when thinking about motivation and engagement, do you see motivation and engagement as being interchangeable terms or that they're truly distinct constructs?
Well, they're highly, highly related. And if you go back in early history of motivation research, basically engagement was used as a dependent measure, an objective, observable dependent measure of motivation. So people like Atkinson and the achievement motivation people, they were studying persistence and effort, latency of response to measure motivation. And I think of those kind of things like effort and persistence as engagement. So they were manipulating motivation and measuring engagement and calling them the same thing. And that's fine. So obviously they're related. And most people say that motivation's the private, unobservable aspect of motivation, whereas engagement's observable, public, you can see it. It's objective instead of subjective. So they're obviously highly related. But that was a couple of decades ago, or a couple of generations ago. Now we think of engagement a little bit more purposefully, that people are not just expressing their motivation. They're trying to do something purposefully. So what are they trying to do? What's engagement, the function or the purpose of engagement that makes it different from motivation? And we find that's, that people are trying to make it, students are trying to make academic progress. And that makes engagement different from motivation. It's closer to coping, or it's closer to coping, but it's what students try to do to make academic progress. And then as we study it more, we find they're doing more than that. They're trying to satisfy their motivations. And that's interesting because that makes engagement the predictor and motivation the outcome. And they're also trying to create motivationally supportive learning environments for themselves. So the important thing is that engagement has all this purpose, all this function that is kind of not separate from motivation, but it's enough to make it a distinct construct. So I treat them as two different things. And I think you can study engagement in its own right and have a program or research on engagement that's related but not totally dependent on motivation.
Great, well, thank you. The next question I have is, in the study of engagement, there are different views about how many dimensions make up student engagement. So I'm interested in what your current view is on how many dimensions should be included in the study of student engagement.
Well, first, we need more research on this. It's not clear. I think it's kind of clear to me, but I don't think it's clear to the field. So we don't need more confirmatory factor analysis on self-report questionnaires to find out how many factors there are. We've got plenty of those. I think we need to have research that looks very carefully and rigorously at students as they try to make progress. They try to learn a foreign language. They try to improve their tennis serve. They try to become a better writer, whatever they're working on. We watch them very carefully. What exactly are they doing? And if you do this, I come up with three paths. That's what I think of engagement, a pathway to student progress. And they're doing three things. The first thing they're doing is they're working really hard, the ones that make progress. And I call that behavioral engagement, like everybody else. Second thing they're doing, they're working very strategically, or they're smart. The mental simulations, etc., problem solving, that's cognitive engagement, and everybody will agree on that one. The third thing they're doing, they're trying to be proactive and create supportive environments for themselves that they can thrive in. And I call that agent or agentic engagement. So these are the three aspects of engagement I think are really important. They really predict who achieves, learns, makes progress. So I'll say there's three. That would be my answer. But I acknowledge that other people put in emotional engagement in there. That's very important to people. But I don't, because, well, I sort of do and I sort of don't. I don't think we don't have the answer to that. But I think of interest and intrinsic motivation as both predictors of engagement and outcomes of engagement, but not engagement itself. And we could have a long story on that, but not today. And the other one that people emphasize is social engagement. And people can engage themselves socially and interactively and I don't think these are emotion and social engagements are core strategies or pathways to academic success. So my answer would be three: behavior, cognition, and agency.
That's very interesting, especially as agentic engagement is a much newer dimension that's been proposed, mainly by you and your team, but I found it very fascinating.
Thanks. We're making a lot of good progress. I think it explains more the R square in whatever outcome you're trying to understand, like learning or achievement or skill development. It's a useful concept because it boosts the R square. You can explain who really does make progress more than the next guy.
Very interesting. Okay, the third question I have, kind of following along with that, is what are the current strengths and obstacles you see in the measurement of student engagement?
Let's see. Well, first, we need to take disengagement much more seriously. We don't have measures on this. We don't have very good self-report measures. We don't have teacher ratings. We don't have observers ratings. We're not very sophisticated on the concept of disengagement, and I think that's holding us back, because that may be equally important in understanding who's making progress and who's not as engagement itself. So I think we're way behind where we should be on that regard. But more optimistically, I think the measurement of engagement is a sophisticated field, because if you look at how there's lots of ways you can measure it in a reliable, valid way. Just real quick, self-report, behavioral observation, have raters come into the classroom, teacher report, peer report, psychophysiology, like heart rate, and maybe even neuroscience. There's lots of ways, and these tend to be intercorrelated. Unlike like motivation, the student may say, I'm really interested, and the teacher may say they're not that correlated. But the engagement, all these different measures of engagement are highly correlated. So it makes me think that people know what it is. It's one construct, not a diverse construct. So I think the measurement of engagement is a real strength of this research, but we haven't capitalized on it yet, especially with disengagement. So we've got a chance to make engagement a sophisticated area of research, like motivation is or emotion is. And we're not there yet, but we should be there, I think, because we know how to measure the construct, so we ought to understand it pretty well.
Yeah, I think we're definitely heading in that direction. There's a lot of research coming out from engagement researchers. All right, and my last and final question, and I think this is particularly interesting as you are not in the US anymore.
Well,
So, are there cultural differences that need to be taken into account when thinking about the generalizability of student engagement findings?
um, in a way, I think it doesn't matter what culture you're in, what gender you are, what age you are. If you're trying to make progress, there's three basic ways to do that. And I've outlined what those are. But if you look at cross cultures or some other dimensions, you'll see that, like in Asia, there's some preferred strategies to success or progress, and that's working hard. Behavioral engagement is the path to success in Asia, whereas emotional engagement, not so much, agency, not so much. But in the West, you see emotional engagement is important. You're supposed to love what you do, be interested in what you do. Working hard is important everywhere. Um, but agency would be important. So maybe the strategies that students prefer to engage themselves to make progress, that may vary on a lot of demographic variables, including culture. But I think the construct's still the same, just like motivation's the same and engagement's the same across cultures. People express it differently. Cultures value it differently. And I think you can see it most obviously that, for example, just one example is in the East, they work really hard. And in the West, you're supposed to have passion and love what you do as paths to um, progress. Those are differences, maybe big differences.
Well, thank you. I think we're just about out of time, so I want to thank you for joining me today. It was really great hearing your insight and thoughts about student engagement, and we're definitely looking forward to see how the field and the study moves forward. So thank you.
I think it will. We'll see.
All right.
Okay, thanks.
So, I want to ask you a couple of questions that won't be on the interview,
Okay.
but I need to figure out how to pause the recording.